Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Mid-Maine Chamber of Commerce and Thomas College Business Breakfast Series. My name is Kim Lindloff. I'm the President and CEO of the Mid-Maine Chamber. I'm a proud Thomas alum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here this morning. I want to remind you to turn off your cell phones in consideration of our speaker. I also want to thank our 2019 Business Breakfast Series sponsors. They include AT&T, Cross Insurance, People's United Bank, Nicholson, Michaud and Company, CPAs, O'Donnell, Lee, McCowan and Phillips, attorneys at law. Our media sponsor is the Morning Sentinel, and our radio sponsor is the Mix 107.9. I hope that you had a chance to visit our business spotlighters out back. They were the Central Maine Growth Council, who works with as a partner of Mmcb, who we're going to hear from today, as well as TD Bank. TD Bank does a lot of work with companies that are doing international trade. So thank you both for being here. They also have donated door prizes that we'll be pulling at the end. I want to thank Crossroads-TV for airing our business breakfast. It can be found on cable channel, local access channel 1301 in this region. And I also want to thank Lockout Labs, who was our entrepreneurial spotlight today that was sponsored by the Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation and the Central Maine Growth Council. We have evaluation forms on your table. I'd like you to take a moment to complete those at the end of the breakfast presentation. You can either leave them on the registration table as you depart or just leave them on the table and we'll pick them up. We have a few upcoming events. Tonight at Central Maine Growth Council is hosting Tech Night, and it's from 5 to 6:30 at Bricks Co-working and Innovation Space, which is located in the Hathaway Creative Center at 10 Water Street in Waterville. Sam Frattoni, who's the chair of Maine Angels, is going to be the guest speaker, so if you're looking for money, that's the place to be tonight. On March 20th, next Wednesday, Snow Pond Center for the Arts in Sydney is hosting our business after hours from 5:30 to 7. That promises to be a great networking opportunity, and we hope you'll join us. And then we have our big business-to-business showcase, our trade show, on March 28th from noon to 6 at Colby College's Field House. We have a few booths left if you're interested in showcasing what your business does. We get about 2,000 people going through the Field House in those 6 hours, so it's a really great opportunity to get your business name out there. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our guest this morning, Wade Merritt. He is the president of International Trade Center. In 2017, Wade Merritt was appointed president of Mmcb and state director of international trade within the Department of Economic and Community Development. His appointment is the culmination of 22 years at Mmcb, progressing up the organization from frontline staff to regional office director, followed by 11 years as vice president. During his time, Wade has served Maine's business community through the creation and development of several major sub-programs, including the Canada Desk and Invest in Maine, Mmcb's Investment Attraction Initiative. He also was the creator of Mmcb's Study Maine Consortium, which promotes Maine's secondary and post-secondary educational institutions to a global audience. During his time with Mmcb, he's organized multiple trade missions to 15 different markets on 4 continents. Wade's a native of Bangor and a graduate of the University of Maine. He recently completed a program on nonprofit leadership at Stanford University. Currently, he resides in South Portland, Maine, with his wife and daughter. Please join me in welcoming Wade Merritt.
Every time I listen to that, I think of George Costanza. When he says, you know, if you took everything you've done in your life and compressed it into 2 days, it sounds pretty decent. So thanks for that, Kim. I couldn't have written it better myself. Thanks for the great introduction. It's great to see you, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk with your members about what's going on in the global economy and how Maine kind of fits into it. In addition to me, I want to introduce Julia Munsey, who's the Trade Center's Director of Membership and Corporate Development. I'm sure, knowing how awesome Julia is as a networker, she's probably met all of you 3 times already this morning. But if somehow she's managed to miss you, Julia is right there, of course, dead smack in the middle of the room. So, hey, Julia, how's it going? Thanks for coming up today. a lot of friends in the room, which is great. I see Mike Duguay, who I think we started together as teenagers in this business many, many years ago. Joy McKenna, who I knew from Baldacci's office, but actually we know each other going all the way back to high school back in Bangor. Jim Dinkle and Kim and a number of others. So it's great to see so many friendly faces out there this morning. I've got some remarks here, and then we'll have time for questions. This is a very, very large topic, obviously. And when you talk about basically everything outside the United States and what's going on there, we could spend all morning. We won't, but I will leave lots of time for questions because even with the remarks I have, we're probably still not going to capture all of it. I think today is probably the first time I've come up and spoken to the Mid-Maine Chamber. It was quite a shock to me. As Kim mentioned, I lived and worked in Bangor until about 2006. It's remarkable to me still that it's been 12 years since I packed up and left that end of the state for that end of the state. I do recognize that I-95 does not run uphill, so that is good, and I want to get that out there right now. 2 years ago, I was honored to be chosen after 11 years in the VP's role to be chosen to lead this kind of constantly evolving effort. This organization was founded in 1996. They moved me in with the furniture. That's kind of the running joke. And it constantly amazes me and impresses me all of the really kind of interesting things that are going on in international trade in this state, particularly when most people think there's not a whole lot of things that we do internationally in the state. I'm also the first native Mainer ever to hold this position in the 20 years of the history of the organization. And that leaves me convinced, as always, that this is one of the best jobs ever. You know, really, I get the chance to travel internationally. I get to talk about Maine to a global audience. I get to promote our communities, our businesses, our educational institutions, and everything else we have to offer to a global audience. And that is an exciting and a gratifying position to be in. So we find ourselves at a really interesting place in terms of our engagement in the international economy. After kind of 20 years of kind of keeping on, you know, we were just sort of doing our thing here. President LaChance, nice to see you. You thought you would sneak in. I was going to say, I hope that you were going to show up today. Thank you. It's good to see you. Yeah, it's all right. No problem. So we find ourselves at a really interesting place in terms of engagement in the global economy. So after 20 years of kind of keeping on, it's an issue that's suddenly gone from being interesting, especially for those of us who kind of live and breathe this stuff, gone from being interesting and enough to keep me interested in this job for 22 years, to suddenly very interesting. It's gone from the back of the business section to the front page of the above the fold in some ways in the last couple of years. And so if you can imagine, as you can probably imagine, those of us who are interested in working in economic development, whether it's international or not, are still trying to make sense of everything that's been going on, everything that you've been reading about in the newspaper. And I'm sure that when we do get to the questions and answers, I'll take at least one about the tariffs, probably one about the new NAFTA and how these are going to affect the state's economy. And we're asked that question every single day by our stakeholders, by the government, by the media, and most importantly by the small business community in the state that we serve, to explain it, to interpret it, and to kind of help them navigate through it, through a very constantly changing and evolving competitive landscape. So why bother? Well, it's the size of the prize. 20% of global GDP, which is about $15 trillion, is traded each year. It makes it the largest business segment in the world. It's important to note that no matter what else is happening, this is how I bring it home to everybody else, what else is happening, trade is happening. And so rhetoric and headlines kind of notwithstanding, after 22 years, I still remain convinced that greater international engagement remains the best route, or one of the best routes, to broad economic prosperity and lasting security. And particularly for a state like Maine that really can't depend on its own internal market to find economic growth. So my organization is the Maine International Trade Center. We're a quasi-public entity that was created with a very simple goal, simple-sounding goal, which is to connect our businesses and our communities to international opportunities, be they in the areas of export development, investment attraction, technology transfer. We're a key component to the state's economic development strategy with continuing and broad bipartisan support, a membership base of 300 companies in 94 communities in all 16 counties, and hundreds more who use our services beyond those who have chosen to be members. You don't have to be a member to use us. The membership helps support the organization, but as a quasi-public entity, we provide services to people who ask for it. with a staff of 10, and we're supported by 3 interns. We're a medium-sized trade office in a small state. I know this because I'm pretty active on the national front with my colleagues from other states. We are a medium-sized trade office in a small state, an investment of public and private resources that reflects the ongoing importance of global markets to our state's economic success. In all, the state exports about $3 billion a year. It's about 6% of what we produce, which is just about the national average, but we export about 30% of what we manufacture. That $2.8 billion that we did last year means Maine exports have doubled in the past 20 years. In all, about 2,300 Maine businesses sell to 176 different countries worldwide. But frankly, the number that I always find the most compelling is that 1 of every 4 Maine jobs, about 180,000 of them, is dependent in some way on international engagement or international trade. Whether directly, like manufacturers, logistics, or indirectly, such as the local businesses that support or sell to those companies and are not actively engaged in the international market themselves. 37,000 Maine workers work for a company with international ownership. 2,000 international students are here studying in our high schools and universities, bringing over $80 million to our state. And in short, continued engagement is incredibly important to our future and where we would like to see the state go. It's also critical to keep in mind that no matter how small the global market share might be, each of our companies, each of your companies, manufacturers, service providers, dentists — I have a dental appointment, that's why it was on my mind when I was writing this — dentists, you already have one. So the question for all of us is not whether we should be engaged in it, but how we can best be engaged in it and how we can take advantage of that opportunity that $15 trillion of traded goods and services each year provides us. And so that's where an organization like the Trade Center comes in. So we were formed in 1996, and I like to point this out. I stopped talking about it, but now I'm going to put it back in there, by a unanimous act of the state legislature. We were created with a maddeningly simple-sounding mission to expand the state's economy through increased trade in goods and services and related activities. I don't have to tell you the things have drastically changed since 1996. I had much more hair. It was a different color, but also the way in which we do our work, first and foremost. My first task at MITC was working on Governor King's very first trade mission to the UK and Scotland in October of that year. It was done by a fax machine and photocopier. Market research was done from massive books that were, at that point, 10 years out of date, or from floppy disks that ran on MS-DOS. We're going to see how old you are by whether or not you understand what I just said. Floppy disks that ran on MS-DOS. Yes, the big ones. Yeah. It was a different landscape, and the business community we serve, and we have evolved quite a bit. The needs have changed a lot, too. When I first started, after I kind of did my apprenticeship in Portland and was shipped back up to Bangor, my first job was to travel around eastern and northern Maine trying to convince people that they should try exporting. You want a solid grounding in sales techniques. You travel around northern and eastern Maine trying to convince people to do something new, let alone go internationally. I can say that because I'm of it, so trying to convince people they should try exporting or at least think about international markets. It's lucky I didn't get thrown out of a few places, actually. But now kind of the message is out. So we're much more in the business now of trying to help companies that are already there do more and try that next market or try to source growth capital. So as a result, Kim, I think, mentioned a couple of the sub-programs that we founded. We've expanded our reach into areas like foreign investment attraction and international student attraction. We've added a new program in the last 5 years, I think, called the Maine North Atlantic Development Office. I'll talk about that in a minute, that seeks to connect our state to opportunities in the North Atlantic, Nordic, and Arctic regions. And so with that as context, I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues that we're finding that small businesses are facing, both their opportunities and their challenges, and how challenges can make opportunities and vice versa, frankly. Some are big national or international public policy issues, like tariffs and trade agreements. Some of them are micro issues that are really only addressable by the firm themselves, and some are kind of in between. But they're all relatively attainable. I mean, I think these are all things that that obviously we're here to continue to work on, and our partners in economic development in the private sector are working on addressing as well. First and foremost is kind of one of these in-between issues. It's not huge. It's huge, but it's not something that would require an act of Congress or acts of the World Trade Organization. This is something that can be addressed, at least at some point, by the state or the states acting together as a region. This is cost and access to transportation. This is kind of the constant refrain that we hear in Maine, but this is something that definitely affects our exporting community too. Until very recently, Maine did not have its own container port, and even with that investment, which some of you probably have heard about, the Icelandic national shipping line, Mmcb, moving into the Port of Portland back in 2014, even with that investment, 89% of our exports leave Maine by road, and 60% of them leave by the Maine Turnpike. I remember saying this to Peter Mills one time. I'm like, did you know that you probably have the biggest and most important piece of international trade infrastructure in the state? It is the Maine Turnpike and the bridge over to New Hampshire. And he looked at me like I'm like, I can show you the numbers. Like, everything leaves by truck heading for Boston and New York. This is an area that the Trade Center can't necessarily take a lead role in. We can't pick up the state and move it closer to Europe or China or California. And we don't build ports. But what we do is ensure that the businesses all across Maine have access to accurate and up-to-date information on the best ways to offset some of those costs. We do this through our own services. We actually sit down and talk with businesses, counsel them through some of the issues that they have, really get at the crux of what the company's international issues are. I had a wonderful conversation with a company down east that was saying, we're having a hard time getting our product down to Boston. We're so small, we're not doing this in much volume. I said, well, have you talked to the guy down the street who's also shipping to Boston, who literally 15 minutes ago told me that they're having the same problem? They're like, no. And I said, okay, well, probably you ought to go talk to them. And we were able to put them together. And, so finding ways to kind of put these, getting creative about the ways in which we're able to connect these companies together to find cost savings, that was a good success. Getting at the crux of their individual issues, and then through our kind of network of service providers, whether they be freight forwarders or customs brokers, shippers, foreign trade zones. There's your shout out, Garvin. There you go. Foreign trade zones and others that are working in this space. At a high level, the Trade Center also actively supports our partners who are in the business of doing infrastructure development, going out and telling the stories about how improvements in infrastructure can have far-reaching impacts. A very old friend of mine, a former commissioner of the Maine Department of Transportation, was talking one day about the construction of the new border crossing between Calais and St. Stephen, and noted that it kind of had the effect of moving Bangor half an hour closer to St. John, New Brunswick. It wasn't that we had done anything to shorten the road. Like I said, we can't pick up the geography is kind of what it is. But the improvement in the infrastructure and not making cars wait in line in Calais to be able to just kind of zip across the border, cut a half an hour off the travel time. That may not sound like a lot, but that was 15% off the total travel time between those two communities, which is a significant cost savings for any business or individual that were making that trip. It's also really interesting to me to see what else investments in infrastructure can do. And yes, I recognize that I'm speaking in Waterville, but improvements in infrastructure and investment at the International Marine Terminal in Portland have suddenly made it economically feasible for all of Maine's businesses to do business in places like Iceland and Northern Europe. These are places that always made sense for us. I researched it myself back in 2004 when Bangor briefly had a flight that was transiting, it was going on to Finland. These always looked like good markets for us. They matched up well with our demography. They matched up well with our industries. More about that in a second. But they always looked like they worked well, but we were never able to get anything there. This was the problem. The transit time, the cost of shipping goods there was so high that we were not really able to be effective in really getting anything into those markets. Suddenly, an investment in a container port, and now all of a sudden, those markets have opened up to us. And yes, they do. They provide very good opportunity for us. So the level of engagement between the kind of base communities of Portland and Reykjavik has skyrocketed, which has gone well beyond just business and into areas like arts and research and development, stuff that's kind of outside our traditional scope and mandate, but we have a lot of partners who are working on these things. And with that relationship established, our challenge, obviously, with the Trade Center is to make sure that that relationship is real, and real not just for Cumberland County, but real for the rest of the state, too. What's been interesting is that it has had some unexpected outcomes. I mentioned the arts and the research and development exchanges. It's been good in reminding us that we need to think about grabbing opportunities when they present themselves and being kind of creative and flexible about where the road might take you. It also reminds us that there is power in these small places. It doesn't have to be, Boston to Paris, Boston to London. It doesn't have to involve Shanghai. There is power in these small places if we're creative and we start looking at some of the niches that we can connect for. For example, when we first started exploring opportunities in the North Atlantic, we wondered how could we possibly benefit from linkages with a place that is even smaller than we are. Iceland is a country of 330,000 people. They live on a rock in the middle of the North Atlantic. But we quickly realized that although there were some opportunities for the business community in areas particularly around marine technologies and fisheries, as a transit hub to larger markets in the UK and the Netherlands and Germany, this is a highly valuable relationship, and making sure that we are able to move our freight through there effectively is beneficial. And if that relationship spurred some infrastructure improvements to better connect the entire state to the rest of the U.S., because now the shipping line has a need to, the stuff that they're bringing in here doesn't stay in Maine. It's going out to the rest of the country. If those infrastructure improvements better connect Maine to the rest of the United States, well, now you're talking. Now we're talking about cold storage. Now we're talking about better rail linkages. And all of the state can benefit from that, not just what's going on West Commercial Street. And somewhat more importantly, it provided an entree to some fascinating areas that were not typically within the scope of the work that the Trade Center does, which has been historically export development. In 2016, we hosted a meeting of the Arctic Economic Forum, the first time that the U.S. had ever hosted that event outside of Alaska. The event drew hundreds of business and governmental leaders, had wide impact across the state. Yes, they based in Portland. They also visited Bar Harbor, Orono, and a number of other communities in and around the state, because they were interested in talking about a wide range of issues beyond business and economics. They visited the tribes, because there's a lot of work going on with indigenous peoples in the north, and wanted to see and learn about what was going on here with them. They visited Jackson Lab. They visited a lot of other places, too. So it had wide impact across the state. And as a result of that work, Maine was given a seat at the table as part of the U.S. delegation to the Arctic Forum, which is putting us on the front lines of policymaking in this important emerging market. I have economic here, but emerging market. The National Guard has become a leader in Arctic affairs. Last summer, Bangor hosted the National Guard Arctic Interest Council meeting, which brought together military leaders to discuss operational readiness and technology needs, which is obviously a potential opportunity for Maine businesses that are working in that cold weather space. Last fall and winter, the city of Tromsø, Norway, and the state of Maine exchanged delegations that sought to connect our two communities in areas as disparate as craft brewing and marine technology. In fact, one of the Norwegian breweries that traveled here is now brewing a Maine IPA out of ingredients that they're sourcing from here, and they're selling it up in northern Norway. You want to experience a winter, by the way, go to northern Norway at the end of January. It was pretty awesome, actually. All of this has resulted in 2 visits from NOFEMA, which is an R&D agency based in, or focused on fish and food. They've visited Maine twice now to focus on, to visit Maine and explore partnerships with our businesses here in food and circular economy and kind of, and in those areas. Most exciting is the chance for Maine companies, if they are partnering with a company in Norway, to access Norwegian commercialization resources for growth and expansion in the European market. So it's definitely a two-way street. We're not just talking about commercializing Norwegian research. If we're smart about it, we're also talking about commercializing Maine research in the European market, which is, obviously a big, robust market of its own. The relationship has also brought us closer together with Finland, which is a world leader in value-added forest products. Those partnerships are still being explored. The opportunities are endless, and they're incredibly exciting. We're actually going to be leveraging those connections in May when we explore the future of the forest economy at our kind of major event of the year, Maine International Trade Day. And all of that, let me remind you, from a relatively small investment in infrastructure. And that's where we started this part of the speech, was that we were talking about the infrastructure development. All of that happened as a result of that and the relationships that came from that. And as I mentioned, the next challenge for us is to make it real, make sure that all of Maine is benefiting from it. It's also led us to another new insight, which was the power of small places working together. We do a fair number of international trade events a year. This is what we get the most media for. If you've seen us in the paper, that's probably for that. We do probably half a dozen to a dozen international trade shows or trade missions each year. And typically those missions have gone to really big places like Shanghai or Mexico City or Sao Paulo. And although those places offer enormous opportunities, for a place like Maine, they're difficult to maintain the continuous effort, which is kind of required to maintain that relationship and make a lasting difference. But on one visit to Tromsø or to Cork or to Reykjavik for the Arctic Circle Assembly, hopefully soon with Montenegro, it's not in South America, it's a small country in Southeast Europe where the National Guard has a partnership. We're able to make connections that will last a lifetime. We're at a similar scale with a similar group of people with similar needs. And the relationships grow deeper and they grow faster with places like that. They're connections that go beyond the cursory and the introductory, and they're the connections that, frankly, Maine people are best at. And I really think that that's where we're going to have the most impact in the future. So we brought our horses to the water. We've talked about the kind of the big stuff that we're working on with the Nordics and the markets and where I'm kind of thinking about going. But to really make it real, we also need to be working with the firms. This is the kind of the nuts and bolts of what our organization does. Really working with firms to ensure that they have the capacity within their companies to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. We're working, the other two issues I think I mentioned at the beginning, we had three. The other two are definitely within the traditional scope. They are company level, and that's training and workforce development and ensuring market access. So I'll tackle the workforce development issue first because literally everybody is talking about workforce development these days, and it often gets lost in the shine of what the Trade Center does on the overseas activities. Everybody thinks the international travel stuff is the glamour piece of it, and yes, that's certainly where we're able to show return on investment, but the day-to-day, the grinded out in the trenches work that we do with the companies every day is really, I think, where we're making the most impact. Can't always attach a dollar sign to it, but in making sure that the companies are ready to export and ready to do and take advantage of these opportunities is, in my opinion, the most important thing that we do. The bottom line is that getting involved in international trade is a scaling issue, and scaling doesn't necessarily just mean footprint, doesn't mean like you just have a bigger factory. What it means too is it's a mindset change. It's a mindset issue. And really talking about if you're going to be effective, or if the companies are going to be effective in scaling the business, we get to think about how we're going to scale the people that are supporting those businesses. And to do that, what investments are going to be necessary in the people, but also in the company as a whole. So the first thing I have been advising everybody, all the companies that we talk to that are thinking about doing this, or even if they've been doing this for a long time, is that you really need to get to know yourself. This is an easy one. This doesn't cost you any money at all. Well, theoretically, it doesn't cost you any money. Is really getting to know yourself and really know yourself. Not just like sit down and say, oh yeah, well, I'm Wade and I work at the Trade Center and da-da-da-da, but really getting to know what the strengths are and what the competitive advantages of the companies. It's important in the domestic market. It is absolutely critical when we get outside the borders. Being able to identify what the competitive advantage is, and not only know it, but be able to articulate it. What makes you great should be the question that the company's asking itself. And it sells itself, I'll give you a hint right now, it sells itself is never the right answer for this. What makes you great and what distinguishes you from your competition, not only in the US, but internationally as well. Businesses need to invest the time and the resources in getting trained up. We talk about this a lot, not necessarily just international, but in good business practices in general. I cannot tell you how many times we have put together an overseas trade mission with a delegation of companies from Maine, ask them for copies of their marketing collateral, only to find out that they don't have any. Literally don't have any, or that what they have is wholly inadequate, which is in some cases actually probably worse. We have actually gotten in the business before of when we're taking a delegation overseas to actually sit down with them and help recreate their marketing collateral so that when they're going out there, they're out and they're ready to go. Part of the story that we tell is that exporting businesses are more competitive than those that are focused on the domestic economy only. And while that's true, it doesn't happen by magic. It happens because the companies have invested in their systems and in themselves and in their people. So Our organization helps tackle that in 3 ways. We offer a calendar of public trainings on topics of broad interest. We've got one, I think, on importing, Export 101, and exporting defense-related articles coming up in the next couple of months. Our own internal resources, myself, I've got a team of 4 trade specialists that actually sit down and work with companies to help them through the process through counseling and research, and a network of subject matter experts that either our team consults with or that we actually just refer clients out to. I use the medical model here. We're the general practitioners. We're your family doctors. We're assembling a very good team of surgeons that when you have an issue, we're able to refer you out to appropriate resources to be able to help move things along. I would say probably at least half of the questions that come through the door are something that we're able to answer quickly without having to send out for a referral. But in those cases where we start getting into specialized questions, having that network behind us is crucial to our success, but also our company's. So this year we took stock of our offerings of what we were putting out there for our export training programs, and we decided we would break this up into 3 tracks. These are for people who have limited or no experience in the export market. Those are kind of in between. They've done some, but not a lot. And for those who have kind of more advanced needs. We rebranded it. We're calling it Global U. And the other thing that we did with it was instead of just always being an in-person event like this, we've put it online and we've put it on demand so that companies all across the state are able to access the training programs that we're offering. We are still doing our in-person seminars, but we're recording them and putting them online so you don't have to schlep yourself down to Portland to be there for the in-person part of the event. You can just go ahead and get it when you need it by logging onto the website. This is the goal of making it real for all parts of Maine and just not limiting it to a pretty narrow slice of geography. For those companies who are new to export, which is about 20% of our business, we're offering Export 101, which kind of focuses on vocabulary and basic concepts that frontline staff and management need to understand and do their jobs. This is everything from logistics to marketing. What is a freight forwarder? I threw that out there a minute ago. What is a freight forwarder? How do I work with one? And they provide the framework upon which the companies are able to build. The next in-person class will be up in Bangor in about a month. Like I said, we'll be recording each of the individual sessions and making sure that we're putting them online so that companies anywhere will be able to access them. Kind of the mid-level topics are these next kind of future-focused ones that it may be for an advanced company, it may be for a basic company, depending on where you landed. We'll be tackling areas like cybersecurity, digital marketing. Like I said, the world's changed quite a bit since 1996. Intellectual property protection, some of these issues that just sort of bubble up over time that are timely and topical and companies that are active internationally really need. It's a far different world than it was in 1996. We need to make sure that the service offerings are keeping up with the needs. And then finally, our kind of advanced training sessions, we added this level this year, maybe for 4 or 5 companies in the state, but those people who need it really need it. This is more complicated topics like selling military items abroad. We do have a fairly good-sized defense supplier base in Maine. They have very specialized needs if they're going to be exporting those items from the U.S. They all have international market opportunities. It's not enough to kind of sustain a program for 50 people, but for the 4 or 5 or 6 that might show up for something like this, they definitely need it. And then for companies that don't fit the seminar mold or have more specific issues, as I said, we work together to help identify their specific needs and complete actual projects on their behalf. And in many cases, we're able to move them in the right direction, but if not, we do refer them out to the clients. I can't stress enough the benefits of having a good network of service providers. One of the things that we tell companies as they're starting out is make sure that you know the resources in your community, whether they're bankers or attorneys, insurance agents, shippers, and if they don't exist in your community or you can't find the work that you need, absolutely reach out to us and we can help identify those resources either in Maine or someplace elsewhere. It's a formula that's worked really well for us. We actually work with over 1,000 we actually work with 300 companies on over 1,000 projects last year. So the staff is extremely busy, but it also means that we're extremely well connected because we often are hearing the same questions more than once. But training isn't enough, in my opinion. The other need that small businesses have expressed need for help in has been in finding the needle in the haystack, which is going out and finding a willing buyer for their products and services internationally. We address that issue through our schedule of overseas trade events. We mentioned that one a minute ago, where companies can bring the skills that they've learned through our training process or others to go to a foreign market and actually meet with potential international business partners there. We generally do about 5 to 7 of these a year. These typically have 4 and 5 companies from around the state on them. We've been targeting industries like food, forest products, advanced materials. And for a modest investment, I think these projects in total cost about $30,000. The companies themselves are paying probably about $4 apiece to travel. These efforts generally return over $1 million a year, which is a pretty awesome return on investment, actually. In addition, we usually do at least one broad-based international trade mission each year with the governor as the head of delegation, representing multiple industry sectors, talking about the state as a place to invest or as a place to visit, and just sort of generally promote the state to an international audience. These are more expensive, they're more resource intensive, but the ROI is pretty much generally within the same range. So companies on these missions engage in actual business matchmaking activities, often through our federal partners. We work very closely with the U.S. Department of Commerce. This ensures that they meet with up to 6 pre-qualified potential business partners when they arrive in market, which means the companies have actually learned about the Maine company coming over. They've said, yes, we're interested in meeting with them. It's not just a cold call. When they arrive in market, they've often had a chance to communicate with these people before they arrive, so it's not even the introductory meeting. This is a follow-up in person, which we find great success with. We also are hosting inbound trade delegations of groups who are looking for connections to Maine and to the U.S. market. After this, I'll be heading back down to Portland. We have a group of 40 young entrepreneurs from Quebec that are attached to the University of Sherbrooke, who are on a whirlwind 2-day 4-state trip through New England. I can't imagine doing that to anybody, but they're doing it. It was Burlington and Concord yesterday. It will be Boston and Portland today, and then heading back to Sherbrooke tonight. No thanks. Anyway, I'll be speaking to a group of 40 from Quebec who will be on a whirlwind tour through New England. And later this year, we'll be welcoming another business delegation who will be visiting us again from Norway. And we're working on bringing a group of study abroad agents to Maine to learn about what Maine schools and universities, including Thomas, Lori, have to offer. These activities are not cheap. And for a small business traveling with us to Asia in 2015, this was close to a $10,000 commitment, including their travel. I said $4,000 for the fee, but then they actually have to pay to get themselves over there. We've been able to offer some export development funds that are available through the Small Business Administration, through the STEP program. I think you've got information about that on the desks, on the tables. These are awarded each year to most of the states. The funds are available to small businesses to help offset some of these costs of attending a trade show or paying for a consultant to come in and do the training, to assess market readiness, to do matchmaking activities, or to develop foreign language marketing materials. This is a pretty flexible pot of money that we've kind of targeted on needs that companies have identified. Last year, we were awarded almost $350,000, which was the largest grant we'd ever received for this project. And we want to make sure, obviously, that the entire state is benefiting from it. I think we're at 12 counties now, so we'll keep pushing forward on that one, but making sure that the entire state is benefiting from it. So if you'd like more information about it, grab me after, or be sure to visit the website. So that's a lot. As I'm fond of saying, there's no moss that's growing on the Trade Center. We're actually looking ahead to what the next issues are going to be for us over the next probably 12 to 18 months, and what the topics are that we're going to be covering in the near term. So everybody's asking. Joy did it to me right when she first walked through the door. Where's the next trip? I'm not making an announcement today, but we are going to be revisiting some traditional markets in the coming years, namely places like Canada, Japan, and Germany. We just put out a trade mission survey at the beginning of January, and just got all of our responses back and did our quick analysis. Canada, Japan, and Germany popped to the top of the market, popped to the top of the list. That was interesting. We had some kind of out-of-the-way things. I think we had Israel in there, Taiwan, Vietnam, places that we had been hearing about in the noise in the market, and just kind of wanted to take a temperature to see where people are. But Canada, Japan, and Germany shot to the top of the list, which is telling me that our business community, as far as international is concerned, is kind of looking for safe markets that they understand and can get their hands wrapped around. There's a lot of uncertainty out there. We didn't talk about the tariffs. I'm sure we will in a minute. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, so I think companies are kind of making sure that they're feeling comfortable about the places that they're going and they're investing their money. We're going to be spending some time seeing what can be developed with Montenegro. So I keep saying Montenegro because eventually someone's going to listen to me. Actually, at the Bangor Chamber, I had someone come up to me afterwards and say, "It's interesting that you mentioned Montenegro because I was just there last summer." I was like, I didn't think anybody knew where it was besides me. So we'll be talking a lot about that probably over the next few months. I think the Montenegrin Minister of Defense is going to be visiting Maine in a couple of weeks. Everybody asks us why Montenegro. The Maine National Guard actually has a partnership with the Montenegrin military through the State Partnership Program. And the U.S. State Department has expressed a very strong interest, meaning Montenegro is a friendly country in a kind of an unfriendly place. Let's make sure that we're keeping those relationships strong. The U.S. State Department has expressed that interest in seeing that connection expanded beyond just the military-to-military partnerships and including commercial and educational exchanges. So this is kind of the beginning of an exciting project for us to see where we can take that. We'll also be continuing the great work that we've been doing in the North Atlantic, in Iceland and Norway, but also Scotland and Ireland, where we've been or visited or at least sent staff to over the last year. And wait for it, Greenland, yes, Greenland, where we've had some really great exploratory conversations. It's a very small market, and it is not particularly easy to get to, but it looks like we will have container access via Iceland sometime this fall. They have a lot of needs, particularly around building materials. The forest products industry may have some good opportunities there, so we'll be exploring those over the next few months as well. We've actually had a couple businesses visit there kind of under the radar over the last year or so, although I think we've got the annual report out there. Hancock Lumber publicly is saying that they've been to Greenland because they're in there as one of our success stories, but there have been others as well. So those are the regions. The kind of next big thing for us, the industry that we're going to be focusing on, is the global bioeconomy. You'll hear a lot about that from us over the next couple of months. Everybody thinks that means biotechnology. It's actually not. It's the kind of the future-looking angles of the marine technology and forest products industries. We'll be putting some resources into that over the next few months. This is a combined outgrowth of our work in the North Atlantic. Finland, for example, is, I think, a really great model for Maine in kind of the reinvention of the forest products industry and also natural resource-based industries as a whole. Iceland has a lot of expertise in full resource utilization of its fisheries industry, so we have a lot to learn from them too. And so we extend from the North Atlantic Initiative also our participation as one of the anchor members of the 4 Maine Initiatives Global Markets Committee. So we've been pretty active in that and helping drive some policy changes and some promotion there too. This one's a particularly exciting initiative. It has implications for industries well past kind of traditional uses for what trees have been used for in Maine for centuries. SAPI's new bacteria-proof paper is just one of them. Artificial bone I heard about the other day, made from wood cellulose up at the University of Maine. Leather made from fish skins, textiles made from wood fiber. It's really kind of interesting and future-focused, which I like. And what else can we do and what can we learn from our international partners? So we'll be looking at that and how Maine's economy might benefit from that with a really super group of panelists that'll be visiting us for Trade Day down in Portland in May. We're bringing folks over from Finland, the Faroe Islands, Iceland, Norway, and Denmark, I think, to be part of the panel to kind of talk about that. We're going to try to get them out on the road as much as we can. We don't want to waste, just say, come over for your 15 minutes of panel time. Like, we want to make sure that we're spreading them across the state and getting them to be connected with the people in Maine that they need to be connected with. So I should also mention, because we had some entrepreneurs in the back of the room, that we'll also be highlighting emerging businesses and technologies at our New Products Expo, guys. Good, perfect. I should have known that. In fact, the next one is Julia can talk with you more about it. Julia already has. Julia and I, talked more about it. But in addition to the guys in the back of the room, if you have companies that are in the community here that have a new product or maybe a new technology that they're developing that you think might have global aspirations or potential global impact, we want to know about it. Because this is a great opportunity to promote it, not just to the state's business community, but to some pretty cool people from outside the U.S. And finally, the next big new topic, so new that I don't quite have my head wrapped around how to talk about it yet, is around cybersecurity and digital trade. I just got back from D.C. last week, where I was meeting with my other state trade office counterparts. This was the topic. If it was not about new NAFTA and tariffs, it was about cybersecurity and digital trade. We clearly are, at least I'm feeling like I'm a bit behind on that, so we'll get ourselves caught up to speed on those issues, which also have wide-ranging impact, not just in the IT sector, but for even people like retailers as well, as far as data security and the data that they're holding on their customers. As you can see, I can't even artfully speak about it yet, but this is something that we'll be looking at pretty aggressively, I think, over the next few months. So hopefully this has convinced you this is hugely important and impactful. Yes, Kim, I'm wrapping up right now. Now and into the future. So hopefully some of this has kind of sparked your interest. There's a lot to it. I totally get that. I'd encourage you, if you want more information about it, you want to hear more about it, to get to know either me or Julia or another member of the team. We're all really nice and knowledgeable. We're all coffee drinkers. If somebody wants to come down and buy us a cup, or I'll buy you one, that's fine too. If anybody wants to kind of talk about any of this stuff one-on-one or just kind of want to ask some questions. We rely very heavily on our community partners, chambers and business leaders as a source of referrals and really getting a handle on what's going on in communities all across the state, because we certainly, despite my best efforts, can't be everywhere all the time in Maine, although I have certainly set that as a goal for our team. So it's a big world with a lot of opportunity. I think we probably could leave you with that. Big world with a lot of opportunity. 95% of the consumers and businesses are located outside North America, and $15 trillion is on the table. So let's make sure that we get our companies out there and competing the best they can. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you, Kim. So I got the 10-minute sign, which means we've got less than 10 minutes for questions, and I'm happy to take them. Yes, sir?
Selling of a software as a service, so you're a user in Mexico, you want to subscribe to some software that somebody here in Maine has written?
I won't lie. I won't overplay this and say that we do a lot of it. Most of the work that we do with companies in Maine has generally been around in the manufacturing sectors, as opposed to like a service sector like that. But we have done some work. We're actually in the process of working with a software provider that's selling a subscription service down in southern Maine. They're looking at markets in a couple of developing countries. So we do have some experience in it. What I've found over the years is our ability to be like really successful in that depends on what industry sector that software is attached to. In this case, this is someone who's selling into the public utilities and telecommunications world. That one's a fairly easy one. There are some that can get a little bit more difficult. But yes, we do work with the service providers too. Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Lori?
I have a couple questions. First,
I'm scared now.
No. I remember when Trade Center was formed.
I know. Thank you, by the way.
I think the work that you do is really, really important to Maine's future, and particularly you as a person, your understanding that there's much more to Maine than just Portland South. I really, really appreciate that. So given your vast experience in that, and given Waterville's in the middle of a renaissance, what do you see as the greatest opportunities for Waterville to really transform? And by that Waterville, I mean
I have to say, when I think of Waterville these days, what I love is the crossover from the education, from you and Colby getting involved in the community and the investments that are being made in the community here. Because I think what I was really trying to get at was, to be successful, we really need to think about the investments that are being made in the businesses, is what I was talking about, but also in the communities in general. We got to have people want to be here. You know, that's the kind of the biggest thing, I think, for us. The other thing that I find interesting for kind of any of these sort of mid-Maine communities, whether it's Waterville, Lewiston, Augusta, I guess, to a certain extent, is the kind of concept of these places as being somewhat transport hubs, of people coming in here, this being a centralized location for companies further up the road that might be able to consolidate down here and then move things out. I really do think that the kind of the next levels of infrastructure infrastructure investments ought to be looking at how can we get things out of Maine to the rest of the U.S. And I think that these kind of inland communities certainly have a role to play in that. So.
My second question. No, you first.
You know, a question I have, Colby College, for example, has 97 Chinese students as of last year enrolled there. What can we do, and the same is true for Thomas, what can we do to harness that brain power, but also intellectual property, to stay here, to start businesses here? These are kids that come from very wealthy families from mainland China and Taiwan. And I just wanted to know if you've had experience. I mean, a lot of them I know go on to graduate school outside of Maine. But what can we do to be better hosts and to cultivate longer-term relationships with them besides a four-year education?
Well, it's a really good question, Jim. And actually, Julia's smiling because she knows that we've been having conversations inside about what strategic planning looks like for our student attraction initiative. This has been kind of the goal for all of this. This goes back to 2007. We found ourselves at the embassy in Tokyo meeting with three kind of senior members of the embassy staff. Two of them were from Maine, and the third one had a summer place here. It was kind of remarkable, actually, that we were finding those kind of Maine connections there. And we were talking to them about investment attraction. How do we convince Japanese companies to relocate to Maine? And what they had said to us was, nobody knows where Maine is. You need to think about, you need to get them there as tourists, then you need to get them there to send their kids to school, and then you can maybe start to think about having the investment attraction conversation with them. And that kind of drove it's driven our marketing, actually, frankly, for the last 10 years. When we go overseas, we have a wonderful video, which I should have shown you, but we'll circulate it somehow, called Visit, Study, and Invest, where we focus on all of that stuff. Yeah, there's a picture of a lighthouse, and there's somebody happily eating lobsters, but we're not just talking about that. But that's been kind of the goal, was like, how do you keep those students engaged, and how do you engage the parents without frankly being creepy about it, you know? I mean, this was, I'll be honest, I mean, probably half of those 2,000 international students that I'm talking about here are not at the university level, they're at the high school level. And so finding a way to kind of artfully have a conversation with the parent of a 14-year-old who's dropping their kid off in another country to say, hey, you should think about investing here. I'm not enough of a hard sell kind of guy to do that, but there's got to be a way to do it. And I know that some of the schools have been interested in talking about, you know, how we might be able to approach the students and the student body about, well, think about coming back here. And when we travel abroad, you know, like I think probably the best recent example of this was when we were in Tokyo 3 or 4 years ago. We actually go out, we approach the schools, we say, give us your alumni, if you're willing to share them with us, tell us who your alumni are in these markets so that we can get them invited to the reception, they can meet the governor, and that's where they get the investment pitch without it, you know, frankly sounding creepy. But yes, that is absolutely one of the goals of the program. It's just a big nut to crack. Julia. Yeah.
We had a meeting yesterday with a young professional who went to Bates, and he met a woman there, and they got married. They lived apart around all over the world, and she wanted to come back to Maine. And so they've come back to Maine. He started a business here. He's also an attorney in Portland. But I think the key to that was he felt like Maine was home. He had a welcome here and a connection. And not everybody's going to find their
Absolutely. It's what we do best here, honestly.
Yeah, I used to work with a bunch of international students at Colby. There's over 200 international students at Colby, and one of them took a job down in Portland, and I brought him back to Colby and said, he goes, we got to tell them that Maine is a great option for international students. One of the issues is companies you're going to go through the legal process of hiring an international student. Companies need help with that.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's one of the biggest barriers, frankly. I mean, there are visa options to keep them here for a little bit after they graduate, but keeping them here long term gets to be a bit of a problem. Then you start getting into federal immigration policy, and then, you know, everything kind of grinds to a halt. Lori, I know you had one more.
I think the program to increase marriage is a great idea.
But tell them, Lori, that it's a lot easier if they get married here in the States rather than in their home country because it creates more.
Okay. My other question was, what guidance do you have for us? Of course, we are in the business of preparing students for this new world order, as is Colby. And we feel very fortunate to have this educational hub here. But also through, like, the Harold Alfond Institute for Business Innovation, we have a chance to help educate and move the skills of the area workforce. What specifically would you recommend that be our area of focus or opportunities for us to help truly prepare our young people and our existing workforce to thrive in this global world that's changing so quickly?
Well, there's a $1,000 question for me, isn't it, Lori? Yeah, probably. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, you know, I just sort of started to get into that. You know, I think there would have been a time a few years ago when I said, well, you need to make sure that they know about export finance and export marketing and export all da. And while that's true, and it's important for them to have some international business skills, to Julia's point, I think making people feel welcome and being able to impart some intercultural skills at this point, at people's stage in their career, understanding what it means to work in a intercultural environment, knowing how to deal with accents that don't sound like yours, knowing how to deal with backgrounds that you may not share. I think that's an important piece of it. And I do think just a solid grounding in basic kind of business skills and principles, like how do you run a company? Why is it important that you have good marketing collateral and are able to project a positive image of your company? That kind of stuff are the kind of skills that the companies really need when they go out there. It's like a solid foundational grounding, and then understanding that some of this stuff is additive to that. There are skills that we can kind of teach people, and you can get people up to speed on how to work with a bank, how to work with a freight forwarder, the documentation you need to fill out. But unless they have the kind of those intercultural skills and really having a good solid grasp of kind of basic business principles, I think, you know, that's really the best place to start. Here comes Kim. Thank you, everybody.